Okay, so welcome back to our STAMPS webinar series. So excited to welcome today's speaker, Dr. Brian Nord. So Brian Nord is a scientist at Fermilab's AI Project Office and Cosmic Physics Center. He's also a senior member of the Kavli Institute for Cosmological Physics at the University of Chicago. He leads a team of researchers, you may have heard of Deep Skies, who apply AI to questions in cosmology. Brian focuses on how to improve the ways in which we make scientific discoveries. He earned his PhD in physics at University of Michigan and started his career in large-scale structural cosmology, analyzing galaxy clusters and strong gravitational lenses. And very relevant to stamps, recently, Brian has been integrating AI with rigorous statistical methods and using this to aid in the design of scientific experiments. So today's title will be Simulation-Based Inference, Analysis, Design, and Operations in Science Experiments. So Brian, please take it from here.
Cool. Thanks, Anne. And thanks for everyone for coming to hang out for a little while. And thanks for this chance to talk about something I've been, I guess it's appropriate to say, sort of obsessed with for the last few years. Every time I feel like I've figured something out here, then there's a new question, usually as there is. But I do feel like we're reaching some milestones in the community when it comes to simulation-based inference, especially on the analysis side. So that'll be the first part of what I talk about, is kind of how far the field has come in doing all the things that we need to do just when it comes to data analysis and being able to trust something like SBI. And then the next part will be more about a little bit of the state of the field and using AI and other tools like SBI to actually design the instrument of an experiment, or to decide on the operations of an experiment, like a telescope survey. Yeah, so I've developed a few opinions over the years about this topic. So I might be a little unusually for myself, I guess, at least opinionated about a few things, but hopefully that'll lead to some interesting discussion. And I plan to leave some time for that, because part of what I want to talk about is how we as a field talk about these tools and how we are making sure that we're developing them in the right way to be able to actually use them in science and not just on simulation. And please feel free to interrupt, throw your hand up if you want to ask a question or talk about.
Push button.
Oh, whoops. What was that? Okay. All righty. So the two major questions, as I alluded to, that I like to try to address today and chat about with you are: what's the state of the field for SBI and analysis of science data right now? And what maybe does the future look like when we're using some of these tools to try to make our design and operations of experiments much more efficient? So I'd like to give you just a little bit of framing so you kind of know where my head is at, or like the world that I was trained in for physics, because I think that shapes a lot how I've been thinking about building these kinds of models. In cosmology and astrophysics, this is the game that we're playing here. This great 20-year-old image from NASA that still really holds up really well. It shows you that at the beginning of the universe, let there be light. And then the universe expanded really quickly, this period of early cosmic acceleration that we call inflation, which we're still trying to figure out a lot about. We think it's a thing, but we're not super sure. It's not guaranteed yet. And then since then, the large-scale structure formation that has occurred has just pulled together little bits of matter, mostly dark matter, into this grand cosmic web as the universe is expanding and accelerating in its expansion, at least for the last 4 billion-ish years. And so we use that cosmic web, that distribution of galaxies, along with things like supernovae and that really early thing right around the time of inflation, the cosmic microwave background, the CMB. Over the last 30, 40 years-ish with data and simulations, we have pulled all of this stuff together to really understand what the composition of the universe is, and we're getting close to be able to predict what the future of the universe will look like. So you might have heard of the DESI results, the recent survey where they're asking that question, is dark energy growing stronger? Is it growing weaker? Is it staying the same over time? And it's still, there are some hints in that recent work, but it's still it's still an unanswered question. And we still don't know what really causes dark energy, or what dark matter itself is. So these are the big questions that the field is trying to get at right now. And as we've seen, people have been talking about for a decade now, more and more data, more and more complex data. This is why we need AI. And I'll walk through one experiment that I spent a lot of my postdoc working on, that finished up a few years ago, to give you a sense of what it takes to design and build something like this, and then operate it, and then get science out of it. So this is the dark energy survey. This is a great picture from my old friend Ryder Hahn, former photographer at Fermilab. So that's a human-sized door right there. This facility is built in the 70s, I believe. This truss here, this blue part, and a lot of this white part here, that's been around since about the 70s. Maybe it's been upgraded, but yeah, you're looking at something that's weighs about 1/7 of a brachiosaurus. And we have to move it to sub-millimeter precision to be able to take good pictures of the sky, clear images of galaxies, so that we can measure things like weak lensing and strong lensing. This camera, the dark energy camera, and really the whole DES project is about a $50 million project that came into somebody's brain in the early 2000s. And then it took about a decade and a half to fully design, put it on the telescope, and then do the survey, the 5-year survey. Just here's an example of one of the 72 CCDs in the focal plane. Some of these numbers maybe kind of give you a sense of how much data we're trying to deal with, and how much of it a challenge it can be to calibrate an instrument like this. So these little blue, red, and green things here, those are cosmic rays that have to be removed. That's an easy thing to remove, but there are other issues that occur in raw data that can be much harder to take care of. And I know that the Rubin Observatory, so I forget what they're calling their different kinds of first light, but they've gotten some initial light, and they're going to start their survey soon. And a lot of people are using tools like AI to try to clean up data, or at least understand artifacts in data. So here's another view of the footprint of DES. So LSST will be actually about half this whole thing. So it's going to be much larger, much more precision in terms of pointing and things like that. One last look at the evolution of surveys. So Sloan Digital Sky Survey was one of the earliest large galaxy surveys. And that's been done for a long time, but you can see a little bit how the area of the sky and the number of objects has been changing over time, and the amount of data. So just a little bit more context for why we care so much about these AI and SBI tools in cosmology. So I just want to turn to one really specific kind of cosmic probe, because that is a great example context for how we can learn about the universe from different objects, and why we really need additional tools to do so. So one of my favorite quotes in all of science is John Wheeler's maxim about Einstein's general relativity, which is just simply that energy tells space how to curve, or matter tells space how to curve, and space tells energy how to move. I think I reworded it a little bit, but that's the spirit of it. So if you have a foreground galaxy here, it's warping space-time itself such that light from a distant galaxy will, as it wants to travel in a straight line, in a curved space, that straight line is a curved line. And so what you end up getting on the telescope or in the images is a picture like this on the left. And it can be really hard to model every element of this system when all you have is this information in the image. But there's a lot you can learn. So it's a worthwhile challenge to pursue. When we have things like lensed quasars that are brightening and dimming all the time, that change in light actually can be mapped back to the expansion rate of the universe when that quasar is getting its light and the light paths warped by a foreground galaxy. Other kind of niche objects like a double source plane system is where you have two lenses along the line of sight. So you have two sources. So those two sources are both being warped. The images are being warped before it gets to you. That actually gives you a really interesting and different complementary constraint on dark energy itself. And then lastly, some of the hardest to model objects in the universe are large galaxy clusters, because there are so many sources in it and so many lenses that are doing everything. It's just really, really time intensive to do that. And I don't think there's really work yet out there that has been able to automate lensing of clusters with any tool. It's still a very kind of turn the crank kind of job. Then the other sort of usual suspects, or I'll say just give you a little bit of history. It's taken the field 40 years to really turn this into a cottage industry, which is about where we're at now. And so getting all of this new data from LSST and Euclid, if we really want to make use of it, like that's where we're at right now. We're about to get this data, and we need to get ready a little bit faster, I think, to be able to use more automated tools. But we probably still will be analyzing these objects over and over and over again for a decade as the tools get even better. So any questions about cosmology there? Is this old hat for people, or is there anything that was kind of new that didn't make sense? Okay. So I want to turn to simulation-based inference a little bit. And here, as I was saying to Anne right before we started, this thing kind of has had a few lives, a few different incarnations. So the latest one, which was made very popular, especially by this crew here, Cranmer, Bremer, and Loop. This is from their Frontiers of Simulation-Based Inference paper. They gave us this nice little taxonomy that I think a lot of people who are working in this business are like it lays things out in a really nice way, and I think it expresses a lot of the kinds of tools that are out there. So I just circled here this amortized posterior method because that's one of the more popular ones. So like neural posterior estimation, a lot of people are using this to instead of having to both simulate data to test an analytic model, like say with an analytic likelihood, and then do some kind of MCMC based inference with that analytic likelihood. We use a loop like this where we're just training a neural network to estimate a density. That's really the heart of what this is. You jump over that analytic part, and there are pros and cons to this. I think obviously one of the pros is speed. And the expressiveness of the density that you can get. It's easier to not be limited to something that's oversimplified, like a Gaussian, where that might not be what your data actually give you as a Gaussian. So it helps a little bit with building better models. But then the cons are challenges in interpretability, because you have these million weights in your network, because this is just a neural network. And then also, how are you calibrating the model? When it's less interpretable, it's harder to know that it's calibrated and not overconfident, things like that. So this is modern simulation-based inference, but let's back up just a little bit. So this is part of the, I guess, the opinion part of things, and I'd love to get people's feedback on this. I don't think it's fair to say simulation-based inference is a rebranding. But it's not the first time that this has been worked on. I mean, so Chad and we met, I don't know, maybe a decade or something ago, and he helped enlighten me to understand the history of likelihood-free inference, which I think he was one of the early people to work on. And so I think, if I remember correctly, that was about 2 decades ago, something like that. But even before that, in the 1990s, economics had a thing called indirect inference, which is very close to a simulation-based inference. You just didn't have neural networks, or at least ones that could do the job that they're doing today. So that's a little bit of the history, and the new stuff, this new modern simulation-based inference, a lot of the differences are due to AI tools. Excuse me. But there are a few other things like differentiability of your simulator or of your inverse model, and then things like simulation-based calibration. It's somewhat new. I think people have put a lot of effort very recently into getting that kind of calibration right. But then I'm jumping a little bit around on the slide here, but I think it's also useful to take a bit of a step back and in realizing that there is this history. I think it's useful to take a step back and ask, like, what makes simulation-based inference the thing that it is, and what's the boundary around what it actually is? So I think my claim is that the core characteristics of a thing like SBI, well, we can call it SBI for now, is that it's predicting latent and usually physically meaningful parameters. So it's predicting a parameter, not an observable, typically. If we're going to call it inference, I think that's what we have to say that it's doing. And then you have amortization and training with simulations. Simulations have been around for a long time, but now they're getting much more high fidelity and faster. So they're more useful now. And then third, I would say that you get these expressive densities, so it's very flexible. And this is a path to uncertainty quantification in AI that people have been trying to do for, maybe I'll say, a decade. I think I would, and please correct me here if I'm missing some history, but I do, now that this view that I've come to is that anything that is trying to get a density out, and you're using simulations to train, and you're trying to predict these latent physically meaningful parameters, I would say that that's SBI. So a lot of regression models, if you're getting a mean and a variance that you're predicting out of your model for a latent parameter, so like MC dropout, deep ensembles, Bayesian neural networks, I think we might as well call those things SBI also. Yeah. Maybe I'll just leave that there. So that's the family that I see, and that's the history that I see of SBI. Yeah. So any history nerds out there, or people of just like who are aware of how this works, and I'd love to hear if I'm missing something about this. So here's another little bit of an opinion and part of my obsession and my concern. So I think SBI has been used a lot in physics, really a lot in astronomy. And similarly, like, so I think it was around 2016 or 2017 when just neural networks, mainly for classification, but started to get used in astronomy. There was years of papers of testing it on a different kind of data and showing that it works. So now, like, that's not really a thing that we're doing anymore, of just like kind of doing a quick, let me simulate some data, let me throw a neural network at it and show that it works. Like, that's not, we know that that's how things are working now. And we know that that works now. And something similar I see is happening with SBI. And there's a bit of a march, I think, toward better calibration and better model assessment. Like with each new paper, I think people are seeing that we really need to figure out how we're going to trust these models before we can actually put them on data. I haven't seen many papers. I can't really think of one where I felt like, oh, we applied SBI to a data set and we trust it, and this is new science. I don't think I've seen that. If I've missed it, I'd love to get a reference. The way that I've been thinking about this a little bit more and more is that we need to apply pressure points to our models, and we really need to be comprehensive. And part of the reason I see this as a bit different from, say, analytic models is that we have this whole big set of parameters, the neural network parameters, where errors and model miscalibration, a bunch of things can hide. So I think it takes a little bit more work, maybe a lot more work, to be able to trust these models. I've been thinking maybe we need sort of 3 different pressure points. There's simulation-based calibration, which that's where I think people are realizing you need to show your posterior coverages, you need to show your parity plots, you need to show a lot of these visualizations that give you confidence that the model is working well. But people are not doing benchmarking yet with standard data sets. People are not really reporting single metrics that we think we can trust. So I think there's a lot of growth that can be had there. Also, doing more forward modeling from the parameter space to the observable data space. I think we need to do a lot more of that to be sure that we're seeing that the density that we found can actually produce the data that we're trying to infer from. And then third, I think, which has the longest way to go potentially, is getting statistical guarantees for the model. I don't know how I would trust a dark energy result from an SBI model unless we had statistical guarantees. So I'm only aware of a few things that go in this direction that really try to get the job done. So I've studied Anne's Waldo paper, and we've talked to her and her co-authors a bit to try to see how that can do the job. And then my postdoc and I, Shubendu, we've been developing a conformal hierarchical method with local validity that it's based on some of his prior work in conformal uncertainty with classification. And we think this will also be another nice addition because it will also tackle hierarchical models, which is going to be really helpful since we're talking not just about local astrophysical parameters like the Einstein radius of a single lens, but dark energy, which is a parameter that affects all objects in the universe. So in terms of assessing models, I think maybe we have a checklist, and if we can start checking these things off, we'll be ready for LSST data in a reasonable amount of time. But there are also a few other things that I'm really worried about. So I'm worried about predicting out of distribution, especially for a non-interpretable model. Some of my colleagues and I have done a bunch of domain adaptation work with SBI models where we're starting to be able to give proofs of concept that can work. And I'm worried about more expressive densities. So can normalizing flows actually give you all the distributions that you might expect to have in your data for a posterior? All right, maybe I'll pause again there. Does anybody have any thoughts? Anybody want to debate anything?
Yeah, I'm very Brian, I have a question.
Sure.
I'm very curious about this hierarchical conformal regions. Are you going to talk about that today?
It's not quite ready for prime time.
Uh,
Yeah, no, we were gonna try to submit to NeurIPS and we got really close, but actually the challenge that is making it take longer than we expected is so we have the theory down pretty well. The proofs are there, so we're liking that. But doing enough experiments and finding enough data that you can really treat as a benchmark has been difficult because so hierarchical modeling is important in a lot of places, but it's been difficult to find data that is well documented enough and things like that to be able to do the comparison. So we're gonna get there, but it's gonna be a few weeks, I think. Yeah.
okay, thanks. So this is just a teaser to let us know that it's coming.
Yeah, to try to fill out the story. But yeah, but I do, even though there are these things that I think we should all be concerned about, I do think I think maybe this is a finite checklist, and we'll get there in human time.
I have a question, maybe.
Sure.
I'm not in this space. This is not my expertise. But how about tools like counterfactuals, and the theory of the causal theory of peers, and those kind of tools? Will that help?
Yeah, actually, no, you're right. Yes, that's a really good point. So my brain isn't there yet, but that is another thing that I probably should add to the list. I think it merits us all taking that step back and asking, how do we trust a model? Here's a challenging one that we're trying to build, and we need everything that we might, everything we can get our hands on to trust it. So yeah, counterfactuals for sure. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So I thought I'd jump to some examples, and I'll reference some of the folks in my group here, just to give a sense of where we've tried to push the envelope a little bit in being comprehensive for these assessments. So what you're looking at here is, feel free to ignore the plot, but or ignore the details of the plot. What I want it to tell you is that you can use SBI to, on simulated, somewhat realistic strong lensing data, you can efficiently get posteriors for lots of parameters simultaneously. But these are not all the parameters that we care about. So these corner plots are going to start to really not fit in papers anymore, or we're just going to have to be more picky about what we present. But one could imagine doubling this number of parameters, and that would maybe is the limit. And that's not getting hierarchical yet. So in this paper that recently graduated graduate student Jason Poe finished, we tried to show all the SBC diagnostics that we could I think we sort of invented one or two new ones, but they're not really earth-shattering, just gave us another visualization. And we built a simple BNN, and then we compared it to a neural posterior estimator with normalizing flows. And with less training and less hand tuning, the neural posterior estimator is better than BNNs. And of course, it's faster than, so I forgot to mention, sorry. So modeling a single strong lens, that very simple thing that just has a few arcs, and there's one lens, and there's only a little bit going on, like that first one that I showed you with the quasar, that morphology, modeling that can take like easily a day of human time if you're using a traditional MCMC method. So now we can, if you have a good neural posterior estimator, of course it's a sub-second computation. Oops. Gaurav Kular, who's now at University of Washington, he's a research scientist there. He did the first neural posterior estimation for distant galaxies. So this will be really cool also once we can trust them, because then like this is like what data JWST is giving us. It's these galaxy spectra, that's flux as a function of wavelength, that can be also a day or more of human tuning to get that model to work. So here he did the work of comparing SBI to an MCMC. So the uncertainties here are more expressive. The posteriors are more expressive, even though and more accurate, even though the posteriors are a bit wider. But I'd rather be correct about the posterior shape than have it be artificially small. My postdoc Srivani started, I think this is the first neural ratio estimation for population level inference. So this is us trying to push into getting these cosmological parameters out. And so she made a bunch of Einstein rings with our simulator. She's advanced this work since now to do more morphologies of objects. So you can see here the parity plot that's just showing that the predicted dark energy parameter W is mostly accurately predicted. We couldn't really figure out why there's this sort of bimodality, like what this chunk of objects is. So we have to figure that out. But now we're moving on to 2-parameter inference, so not just dark energy, but also the cosmic matter density, omega matter. Let's see what else. Right, and so here's one of those posterior coverage plots. That is one of those visualizations that we need to show to give us confidence that the model is working properly. And I think it's great that we're all showing these plots in these papers, but I do think it's time to move on to other sort of more quantitative metrics where possible. Not that this isn't quantitative, but I'm thinking more numerical. We can learn from the broader AI community in that way. Here's that example I was saying about domain adaptation. So I feel like we're getting closer as a community, crossing this off the list, potentially that being able to go out of distribution and extrapolate, which is going to be necessary for operating on real data. So Paxton Swierk is an undergrad at UChicago who he built this NPE model and included unsupervised domain adaptation. So that kind of domain adaptation scenario is where you have source domain data that is your primary training data, but then you also have, say, a few examples of your target data, but in this case, it's unsupervised, so that target data doesn't need to be labeled. And this example, we didn't quite take it as far as I was hoping, just because what the different domains in this case were noiseless images, so no PSF that blurs things and no pixel noise. And then the target domain is noisy images, so we did have blurring and pixel noise. If this is going to work, we're going to have to extend this to the other parameters like the Einstein radius and things like that. But this little collage here is showing that with NPE only, so without domain adaptation, your latent space of your network parameters does not overlap, so you're going to get bad predictions. And that's what you see here with these solid lines. This is the coverage showing that on the target data, the NPE only model is way overconfident and it's getting it wrong. And you're also seeing big error bars in our corner plot here. And then when you add in domain adaptation, your errors are better and your latent space overlaps and your model is well calibrated. Yeah, the next thing we need to do there is just do this with the Einstein radius. And the tricky thing is, how are we going to do this when it comes to cosmology? Because we're not going to have multiple target domains of real data in the universe. There's only one universe. So that one I'm not sure how we're going to check off the list. So those are the examples that I wanted to share of how we in the field, I think, are trying to push the envelope in terms of having enough diagnostics to trust our models, and how we're trying to do all hopefully this finite list of being able to make a trustworthy model. So maybe I'll pause there again. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions? Okay. So now I want to jump to putting AI in some other places in the science cycle. I guess I would claim that, given some of the turbulence of our modern times and of the future, say when it comes to climate change disrupting a lot of things, changing economic situations, changing geopolitical situations, it seems like it's going to be really, really hard to get new big projects off the ground. So just think about how many careers of generations of careers will it take to build the next particle collider? And how do you know that it will be able to operate in our climate future? So like how do we know we're going to be able to build that and actually use it in a reasonable amount of time? So that's why over the last few years I've been turning a little bit more to how do we how do we make each of the really hard parts in our science experiment operations and design, how do we make that faster? So the Department of Energy is also, I think, taking this seriously. So it was a few years ago when they started having conversations about self-driving facilities, buzzwords like that, self-driving labs, and then I think in biology and material science, we've seen a lot of interesting proofs of concept of actually having the whole lab, like they're great demonstrators of much faster testing of new proteins or new materials because of this framing of a self-driving lab or an automated scientific cycle. And so actually this history goes back, I don't know if it goes back super far, but it does go back to at least to 2010 when Ross King out of the UK started talking about a robot scientist. So he's been on this trip for quite a while. Other people who I think are thinking about this is the mode collaboration, which is like machine learning for design of experiments or something like that. And then simulation intelligence is a thing that I think I remember a white paper coming out a couple of years ago, and that the framing there I think also fits with automating the scientific cycle. Right, I said that already. So a little bit of the work that my crew has done over the last couple of years to try to poke around in this space. Actually, he was a high school student when he did this work, but this is Ben Cohen. He designed a new combination model that addresses an interesting problem. So optimizing telescope optics, getting all your reflectors, refractors, mirrors, lenses in there in the right order, in the right shape, is a challenging thing that takes, again, a lot of manual time. So what Ben, and part of the problem that we saw with this is you have a continuous parameter space when it comes to the shape of an individual object, but then you have a discrete parameter space when it comes to which of these objects are you putting in the world along an optical train. So to do this, he combined a tree search method with a simulation-based inference method. And that worked out pretty well on what the standard here is, a 3 optical element system. That's kind of the benchmark. So it worked out really well. He also showed that it might work for symbolic regression. Let's see, we're running a little bit, I'm going a little bit slow here, so maybe I'll skip this or I'll be really brief. This is one of our nights when we were getting the dark energy camera set up to go many years ago during science verification season. It was amazing, wonderful time to be sitting in control room beneath the telescope and being able to go outside and look at what's going on and all that. But I don't think that even with future telescopes, they're going to be complex enough that we might still need these people in the room, but we will also need more automation. Maybe we'll need fewer people, but whatever's going to happen, we're going to need it to be more automated. So what we've done a little bit is we've done some reinforcement learning work here. We built a little simulator of a sky survey strategy designer, or a simulator of moving across the sky for a simple observing strategy. And then we built some reinforcement learning tools to design the optimal one based on some science that we wanted to get out of it. There's only a little bit other work in this area. I think maybe the reason it hasn't taken off is that people think it'll be useful, but it's not trustworthy enough to actually use. And so LSST did not want to do, my understanding is LSST didn't want to do this at all because they had already started designing something by hand, and opening up the bucket of worms again was just was not worth it. But I would estimate that future surveys are gonna need to do that. And part of the reason is that most of these big projects are trying to do many different kinds of science at the same time. So trying to see the most distant objects and sitting on them for a while to gather enough photons is a different thing than wanting to jump around to try to catch a supernova going off. So I think we need better decision-making tools. And then Miles, Peter, and I a few years ago did a fun project that was kind of aimed at thinking about how DESI could be more efficient, where we did unsupervised graph neural networks with a cosmology metric, so omega matter, and that worked out pretty well also. As I said, I'm going a little slow here. So yeah, so it was almost 10 years ago now, actually, that I kind of got introduced to this question about automating more of the scientific method, because before DESI was DESI, there were two competing groups trying to be what DESI is. We were on the DesSpec team out of Fermilab, and then there was the bigger boss group. Big Boss. Yeah, I think maybe it was just Big Boss, but it was that group who had done Boss. And they won. They're running DESI. But it was a great learning process for me, because I was a mid-career postdoc then, and I learned how challenging it was to design all the aspects of a spectroscopic survey. And we found that no one had built like a simulation of the full thing yet. So that's what we did here with this sort of tortured acronym initialism here, SPOKES. It was the first digital twin of a cosmic experiment. And this is the kind of thing that you need with a lot of high fidelity simulation for each of these boxes, tiling the survey, allocating the fibers on the sky, things like that. But this is the thing, or something like it is exactly what you would need if you want to do more of this fully automated business for designing and operating a survey. So I do think that things like this are in our future. I would guess that in a couple of decades, this is what we're going to be doing for a lot of our science experiments across many. I just reiterate a little bit here, and then yeah. So the reiteration here is just that I think that this is a lot of where science is going. And I think SBI, in addition to other AI tools, are going to be helpful in doing all this designing and maybe operating of surveys and other experiments. But I think that before we can really do that, we gotta really hunker down and make sure that we are able to trust our models. So thank you.